Welcome to the podcast about investing in startups, where existing investors can learn how to get the best deal possible. And those that have never before invested in startups can learn the keys to success from the venture experts. Your host is Nick Moran, and this is The Full Ratchet.
Welcome back for another edition of Investor Stories. On this special segment, the experts describe the most important lesson that they've learned and how that has changed the way they invest. This is the special segment called Lessons Learned. On today's special segment, we have Aydin Senkut of Felices Ventures. Aydin, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
One of the things that I have seen from companies that have succeeded versus companies that have not, honestly, the differences are very, very small and a very narrow, small group. And one of them is the speed of iteration. So one of the main core value we have as a firm is learning and adapting rapidly. So one of the things that I have seen over and over again, and we make close to 300 investments, is that the companies that succeed, assuming that it's a good market and the product is truly differentiated, move really fast and iterate and improve their products at kind of world-class level. If most people do it in a month, they will do it in a week. If people do it in a week, they will do it in a day. Yep. And if most people do it in a day, they will do it in hours. So we found that to be the most critical aspect. The second thing that I learned is just, again, product and storytelling. Time and time again, if you were to summarize majority of the problems that a founder faces, and as a consequence their investors face, is that if a founder is not able to tell a good story, then recruiting is very difficult for them, closing sales is very difficult for them, and then closing next rounds of financing is very difficult for them. Yep. And guess what the three main problems or risks that a company faces? It's very simple. They run out of money, they can't raise money, they can't hire the right people, and they can't sell the product. Honestly, if they can do these three things, it's almost impossible for them not to succeed. Yeah. So when you look for one factor, the one factor that can affect all these three things, time and time again, I found it to be storytelling. Because when you look at some of the very best founders, like they're charismatic, but they can tell an amazing story, which means that they're going to hire the best people, they're going to close the best customers and the most critical ones. And they usually, and I'm not saying this is a guarantee, but they're going to have a much easier time in fundraising compared to many others. So we found that to be a very critical element that we religiously look for.
On today's special segment, we have Steve Glickman of Develop Advisors. Steve, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson you've learned in your time working for the Economic Innovation Group and or Develop Advisors?
Sure. I think one of the more interesting stories is how ultimately the Opportunity Zones legislation got passed and how you find allies in strange places and you find, interesting outcomes from some pretty tough events. So in August 2017, we were at a pretty critical juncture point in this program. At the time, Republicans were ginning up their tax reform legislation. And we saw that as an interesting vehicle for Opportunity Zones because it's very tough to get stuff passed. But it was tough to get it included because the whole gist of the tax reform bill was to simplify the tax code. And this was going to create a new complex program. And then, in August were the Charlottesville protests and the neo-Nazi march and the violence that occurred as a result of all of that. Obviously, a pretty terrible event in recent U.S. history. President Trump, responded to it by calling up Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, and now the only Black Republican member of the Senate, and also our chief champion of the Opportunity Zone legislation. He partnered with Cory Booker, now obviously a presidential candidate among the Democrats to run against Donald Trump, to do Opportunity Zones. And Donald Trump said, hey, what are we going to do to prevent more of this, violence and more of the breakdown we're seeing in communities, not just what happened in Charlottesville, but what we saw in Baltimore and St. Louis. And it was a moment for Tim Scott to get Donald Trump's attention on the Opportunity Zone legislation. And he said, well, there's a lot of things you should do, but one thing you should definitely do is support this bill and make sure it gets in as part of tax reform. And I think like Donald Trump does in a lot of different circumstances. The next day on Air Force One, without vetting it with his staff, as far as we could tell, someone asked him a question about whatever, and he said, I think ignored the question, but said, you know what we should do? I'm going to endorse this opportunity zone legislation. We need to get it passed. And that public statement on Air Force One helped give it momentum to get in the tax reform bill, which Tim Scott was a big champion of. And the result of this small little part of that 1,000-page tax code got passed into law as the only bipartisan piece, really, of the entire tax reform bill, arguably the only bipartisan bill that was passed at all under Donald Trump. And it was because of these strange set of circumstances and strange bedfellows. And I think the broader kind of story from all of that is there are ideas that Republicans and Democrats can get behind together. This legislation had 100 co-sponsors, about equally divided among Republicans and Democrats. And if you look at the presidential candidates, at least half of them on the Democratic side have publicly been connected with opportunity zones. Governors and mayors, members of Congress who were co-sponsors, people like Senator Cory Booker and others. And so there is recognition that this is a problem we've all got to solve, and solving it through traditional sources and channels through the government or philanthropy isn't enough. But it's hard to get there. There's a lot of things policymakers will admit to privately that they won't do publicly, and this happened to slip through because we got a couple of lucky breaks along the way.
On today's special segment, we have Ash Rust of Sterling Road. Ash, can you tell us a story highlighting a critical lesson that has changed the way you invest?
Yeah, I had a company that I coached for over a year that had a really incredible founding team. They were in an unusual space, like one of these hot growing markets, but not a very big market. When they came around to raise money, I introduced them to all my network and with a glowing reference. And one of the VCs that I worked with at the time invested in them and then promptly told them not to take money from me. And the founder agreed with them. And so that was just a lesson in how much money changes relationships.
Wow.
And how, even after all that time that I felt like I devoted to them and how close I felt the relationship was, I was obviously mistaken because, money and brand make a big difference in these kinds of situations. So that was a very hard lesson for me, but it's something that I remember very clearly.
How does it, change your approach now, if at all?
Well, those kinds of situations where, someone might ghost me for a few months and then try and raise money from me, even if they're a high quality founder, I probably wouldn't be interested in that situation, is a good example, because if there's an indication that the money is more important than the relationship, then I won't be that interested. When anyone articulates that clearly, then I take that warning, basically.
What about the referrals to larger investors in your network that potentially could take the whole round?
So, if people, I have no problem doing that, but if people behave badly or, don't respect the relationship in some way, then obviously I just keep a record of that. I usually just have a simple sort of 3 strikes rule. If I get multiple bad reports from founders about a particular investor I've referred, or if they behave badly or something like that, then, just 1 or 2 of those times. And then probably won't be able to send them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a similar situation with we were leading the round for a startup, and I made a bunch of introductions to help him fill out his first $1 million round. And two of the introductions I made actually suggested to the founder that they take the entire round and that the founder shoved me out. Now, fortunately, he didn't take them up on that offer. Thank goodness. But those people are no longer in my network. They don't get referrals. Yeah,
it's and I wonder. I can't imagine you're the only person they've ever done that to. So I wonder how long those kinds of patterns of behavior can realistically last. Again, having lots of money under management makes a big difference, of course, because some people just need the capital. But in venture capital, everybody talks so much that these stories just travel.
They do. Money speaks. But I've heard from many other people since that happened, I've heard mixed reviews on these firms.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been surprised at how much reputation does and doesn't matter. I've seen it where I've told a founder that someone, an investor that they want to talk to, that potentially take money from, has been engaged in potentially criminal activity. And they're like, I just really need the cash. And then on the other side, I've had founders who I thought really needed money, and I've tried to introduce them to a fund, and they're like, you know what, I've heard bad things about these guys, and I'd rather not take money than take money from them.
Mm-hmm. I wish there were more founders that behaved like the latter.
Yes, indeed. I mean, of course, but again, we're biased, right? We're not in the thick of it with payroll to make.
Yeah, good point. That will conclude this installment of Investor Stories. If you're enjoying the program and would like to see it continue, take a moment and leave a 5-star review in iTunes. Also, if you'd like updates on new content from TFR, as well as the top 10 VC articles every week, go to fullratchet.net and sign up for the newsletter. Okay, that will wrap things up for today. Until next time, over-prepare, choose carefully, and invest confidently. Thanks for joining me.